And Mikraz was the exact opposite of the first guy they sent. And when the Prophet saw him coming, he told the companions, "This is a treacherous man." And the Prophet says the exact same thing to Mikraz, but this time with intensity. Like stressing on the part where the Prophet says he'll fight until he's killed. And Mikraz goes back without having achieved anything. You see how nobody so far is able to convince the Prophet to head back? A Muslim is like that, people. The Muslim's clever. He's not fooled with a couple of words. A Muslim's not locked up in the mosque and has no clue about how to deal with the outside world. Go ahead, Quraysh. Send out your third rep. The third guy they send was Suhail ibn Alqamah. And the Prophet knew his key as well. He said to the companions, "This is a man who values religious rituals. Even though he's a non-Muslim, he respects religious rites." So the Prophet ordered all the animals that were brought for sacrificing to be let loose in front of him. Now when Suhail saw this, he just turned around and returned to Quraysh without saying a word, because he saw that the Muslims really did come for pilgrimage, and the sacrificial animals was proof of this. What kind of man is this Prophet of God? Simple. He's a genius. Quraysh sends over its fourth negotiator. His name is Urwa ibn Mas'ud. So he comes over and he says to the Prophet, "I see that you've brought with you undignified people who will run away and leave you standing alone at the first sign of trouble." Basically, he's telling the Prophet that the companions are useless. And while he was saying this, he was pulling at the Prophet's beard. Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah was standing next to the Prophet with a helmet on his head and a sword in his hand, while Urwa was disrespecting the Prophet like that. So he took a sword and hit Urwa's hand with the handle and said, "Take your hand off the Prophet of God." Urwa's like, "Who the heck is that?" "That's your cousin, Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah." Yo, what a burn, man. So Urwa sees that he's not getting anywhere, so he gets up. And as he's about to leave, the Prophet wanted to reply to the insulting comment Urwa made about the companions, but using actions instead of words. So the Prophet asked for some water in order to perform ablution in front of Urwa. As he began to use the water for wudu, check this out. Look at the understanding between the Prophet and his companions. The 1,400 men that were with the Prophet start fighting for the water that is falling off the messenger, so that they too can wash up. Can you imagine the look on Urwa's face? Urwa returns to Quraysh and he says, "I swear, I've been in the kingdoms of both Caesar and the Emperor of Persia. And the love and respect they get from their people is nothing compared to the love and respect the companions of Muhammad have for Muhammad. No way, not even close." The Prophet gave him a dose of his own medicine. Alright, 4 people failed so far. Who's behind door number 5? None other than Suhail ibn Amr. When the Prophet sees him coming towards them, he told the companions, "If Quraysh sent this man, that means they're looking for peace." What do you think, guys? What do you guys think of this Prophet of God? He's got them figured out inside out. This is Islam, people. A Muslim is a person who's got things figured out. A person who knows his stuff and who knows how to deal with people. And I want to make an important point here. A lot of times you find some brothers and sisters who are scared to become religious because they have this impression that they're going to become naive, isolated, they're going to look bad and become disconnected from the world. Nah, people. If this is what you think, then you've got the wrong understanding of Islam. Islam is supposed to make you a better person. The day you become religious is the day you become more successful, more mature and happy. Listen to the stories of the Prophet and his companions, and success and happiness is all you see. You know what the problem is though? We're just not taking Islam from the right source. So Suhail ibn Amr comes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Prophet asks him what he wanted. So Suhail said, "We want a truce." The Prophet said, "Okay." So they begin spelling out the terms and conditions while the companions were sitting there listening. First thing they agreed upon, 10 years of peace between the Quraysh and the Muslims. Second point, Suhail said, "You gotta go back. In other words, you can't perform the pilgrimage this year." So the companions were like, "What? Are you serious?" Put yourself in their shoes. Imagine that you plan to go perform the pilgrimage. You get all excited, you get ready, you're hyped up, and then when you get to the airport in Saudi, the authorities tell you to turn back. Man, I'd be heartbroken. You'd be depressed and crying. So imagine what the companions' reaction would be to such news. They're right outside of Mecca. The companions who are from Mecca haven't seen their home in like 7 years, and they're being told to go back? Why? So that the Arabs don't think you guys entered upon us by force. You go back this year, and you come back next year. So the Prophet said, "Okay." Umar ibn al-Khattab couldn't take it no more. He's like, "Oh Prophet of God, didn't you tell us that we were going to visit the Kaaba? This is what you saw in the vision." The Prophet said, Omar, did I say it was this year? Omar said, no. The Prophet said, you'll eventually do it. Just be patient. The third condition of the treaty was even tougher. Suhail said, whoever leaves Islam and comes to Quraysh, then he will remain with us. We won't return him to you. But whoever becomes Muslim and runs away from Quraysh to be with you, then you've got to return him to us. The companions are like, who would agree to such a deal? It's unfair. The Prophet told Suhail, alright, I agree. What? Why? Why is the Prophet agreeing to everything that they say? You guys realize? Go back to Medina after they are at the door of Mecca, return the converts to Quraysh. What's going on? What's the Prophet up to? The Prophet, peace be upon him, wants the 10 years of peace. He's willing to sacrifice the other things as long as he gets the 10 years of peace. But why? The Prophet knows that if Islam is presented to people in an environment of peace and tranquility, that people will accept it right away. But as long as there's fighting and problems and negative propaganda, Islam is a barbaric religion and Muslims are terrorists and this and that, then people's minds will be polluted and distracted from the truth. Presented in a peaceful environment though, present the logic and beauty of Islam without fear and pressure, then Islam will spread. That's why the amount of people that accepted Islam after this treaty was signed to the day the treaty was broken by Quraysh 2 years later was far more than the amount of people that accepted Islam from the first day the Prophet started his mission up until the Hudaybiyah treaty, i.e. in 19 years. In other words, in 2 years, far more people accepted Islam than the first 19 years of the Prophet's mission. Now the companions aren't seeing the full picture. They're just looking at the short run. Again, Umar ibn al-Khattab is full of rage. He goes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and says, are you not the Prophet of God? The Prophet said, yes, I am. Umar said, aren't we on the truth? The Prophet said, yes. Umar said, isn't their cause unjust? The Prophet said, yes. So Umar said, then why should we give in to their unfair conditions? The Prophet said, Umar, I am the Prophet of God, and he will not misguide me. Umar later on says that he did a lot of fasting and praying to make up for his behavior with the Prophet that day. So they start writing up the treaty, and honestly, Suhail was really rude. I mean real rude in the process. The Prophet calls Ali ibn Abi Talib and tells him to start writing, and the Prophet begins to dictate. In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful. So Suhail says, no, hold on. Who's the most gracious, most merciful? We don't know nobody by that name. Use what you used to use previously. Write in your name, O Allah. That's what we know. So the Prophet tells Ali, write in your name, O Allah. Now Ali was hesitant, but the Prophet insisted that he write it. So he did. The Prophet continued dictating to Ali. These are the conditions of peace between Muhammad, the messenger of God. So he's like, ho, stop there. Who is the messenger of God? If we knew you were the messenger of God, then we would have followed you. Write your name and the name of your father. Suhail's attitude is real insulting. It hurts. So the Prophet told Ali, erase it, Ali, and write Muhammad, son of Abdullah. Ali said, I swear to God, I won't erase it. Ali's mind was set. He couldn't erase the Prophet's name. It was too much for him. So the Prophet told Ali, show me where it is, Ali. Because the Prophet couldn't read or write. And that's a miracle, people. The teacher of this ummah, the one who's negotiating this peace treaty, the one who can see the long-run benefits of making peace with Quraysh when nobody else could, even if it meant accepting some unfair conditions. This man who's involved in all this, he can't read or write. Who taught you all this, O Prophet of God? Allah taught it. Show me where it is, Ali. So Ali pointed at the words, and the Prophet erased it. Write Muhammad, son of Abdullah. So they kept on writing until they got to the part about returning back to Mecca. Anybody from Quraysh who converts to Islam and runs away to be with the Prophet. As they were writing this, something unexpected happens.